On the morning of March 2nd, 1978, B9 was on its way to Victoria Central until it ran into some trouble. Now, B9 was known for causing many issues and having many cars replaced, also known as one of the last remaining PTC 4-car B-sets. Now, these trains are soon to be replaced and the Tangaras would soon take over. Now, this was B9, or was meant to be B9's second last trip, but it ended up being its last trip. As B9 was an express train towards Victoria Central, it went flying down Earlington, though what the driver didn't know is that all hell would break loose at Clydeson. He thought everything was fine. He didn't know things would go wrong. There were track work at Clydeson, and they couldn't use normal tracks, so they had to use different tracks at Clydeson compared to normal. Now, B9 was the first train to go onto these tracks in years. Now, something the driver didn't know was that they had not done maintenance on these tracks for ages, and City Rail had not tested it. Now, the driver slowly entered Clydeson Station, thinking everything was all right, thinking everything was fine with the track work train next to it. But what he didn't know is something would go terribly wrong soon. Something so bad that it would have ended up being the worst crash in history of trainways. This is the Clydeson Train Disaster, 56 years later. The driver of B9 was 39-year-old Henry. He had not been suffering from anything at the time, and this was his second time driving a Sydney train. Now, Henry, forgetting to close the doors, slowly left Clydeson Station. But what he didn't know is hell would break loose. As B9 gained speed and went over the switching track, it flew off the tracks, flying across gravel, and finally smashes into a pole. But that's not the worst part. It even falls off the bridge, the first carriage, then the second one falls even further as the drop is higher. And due to the doors being open, passengers flew out of the doors and then got later crushed by the second carriage of the train. 12 people died, and 17 were seriously injured, taken to hospital. Fortunately, the back carriage was fully intact, but I could not say the same for the second back carriage, as it had almost been intact, but got jolted into the third carriage, which made it go a little bit inside, getting crushed. Now, what could have caused this incident? As I mentioned earlier, this track had not had maintenance in years, and due to the diversion, B9 was the first train to go on this track. They had not tested it before B9. So they forgot completely that years ago they added a dead-end track, which, for some reason, you couldn't change it to the normal track. So that means that any train that would go onto this track would just automatically go to a dead end. Now, signaling could maybe have made it so they could switch the track. Maybe they could have. But signaling issues had other thoughts. They wanted to derail the train, didn't they? Well, because the signal did not actually censor the train, it did not know it had to switch the signal. So then, when B-Set departed Clydeson and went onto the switching track, supposedly trying to get onto the bridge, it couldn't and ended up derailing by flying off this little section of missing track.